Hello everyone, and welcome to my tier list for black bordering. In this first part, I will just be ranking the heroes, but in the next part, I will cover the tier 5s, tier 4s, and tier 3 towers. Also, everything will kind of be ranked inside tiers, but not too much. This tier list is completely based on black bordering, in my opinion, so it will count ease of use, general strength, and a little bit of my own personal biases. Just because I place a hero lower here doesn't mean that it is always bad, but they're just generally worse than the heroes that are higher placed. Just about every hero will have their own usable strategies, and you can probably make anything work on beginner to intermediate maps. Anyways, let's get started. First, we have Quincy. Quincy is, in my opinion, a solid, low B-tier average hero. He has some nice upside, but also has a few glaring problems to talk about. His upsides are being able to completely start games with him, because he costs less than 650, and he has a decent early game, and his surprisingly high late game damage. His downsides are falling off completely for a good 25 rounds, from 49 to 75, which are pretty important rounds by the way, and then needing significant support to deal his sought-after late game damage. He also absolutely sucks against super ceramics and just can't kill them like at all, which is very annoying. He is pretty easy to use and won't require much micro at all to be good, and it is kind of important to time his abilities well, but not really. I think this is a pretty fair balance, so he's kind of average, so low B tier. Not quite C tier, but low B tier. Next, we have Gwen. Gwen is, in my opinion, a high C-tier hero. Pretty close to Quincy in placement for me, but just slightly worse. Gwen's main upsides are having a very formidable early game, and decent support capabilities in the late game. Her main attack popping lead, as well as having pretty high pierce and her cocktail ability, give her a pretty good early game. She does tend to struggle a little bit mid-game because she hasn't quite hit her higher levels yet, but she still helps a bit on 63 and a bit less on 75, but then comes back to help a lot on 76 and 78. In the late game, she is essentially just a glorified MIB that does a tiny bit of damage. Her main use is her heated up buff, which allows nearby towers to pop lead and deal extra damage temporarily. If Gwen is constantly attacking, which triggers the buff, then it can have over 100% uptime, which is nice. Being a glorified MIB is about all she does, however, because her support isn't strong enough to be good on more than like 5 towers. And she is generally outclassed in her support capabilities by stronger heroes, which we will get to later. Her good early game and decent support will land her in C tier, but a high C tier. So, not quite terrible. Next, we've got Striker Jones. I might be a little bit biased here, but I think he goes in a B tier, like a more middle B tier. Striker only really has two good strategies for black borders, and those are primary expertise and mauler spam, and sniper spam. But he's outclassed by Geraldo for sniper support, so you don't really want to count that. Striker is the bomb and mortar buffing hero. If you aren't using them, he just isn't worth bringing. It's as simple as that. Bombs and mortars are pretty strong though, so that isn't like the biggest factor. That's really all I have to say for Striker. If you aren't using bombs and mortars, he is outclassed, don't use him. He's also kind of easy to use, except to get the most out of him, you do have to be spamming his stun ability, and you also have to kind of time his level 10 and level 20 ability. Solid B tier. Next, we've got Oben, a new favorite of mine. Oben is a pretty high B tier for me. Trust me, we will get out of B tier soon. It'll happen. Oben is a druid support plus cleanup hybrid hero, and he just so happens to be pretty good at both of those jobs. His druid buffs are incredibly strong, as the Avatar of Wrath is one of the best black border strategies on non-expert maps, and Oben just makes it even better, which is very nice. And his druid buffs also turn the Druid of the Storm from one of the best ceramic cleanup options in the game to by a long shot the best. And if you are using Oben, it is just a complete no-brainer to be using Storm Druids alongside him. He also just has a pretty good cleanup with Wall of Trees. Trees can eat up a ton of Moab damage and even swallow ceramic rounds for breakfast. This sounds pretty good until it gets buffed at level 20, where it eats entire Moab swarms for breakfast. It's pretty good. His cleanup is one of the main reasons why he is so high. He also has a pretty good early game, with his main attack having high pierce, which is very valued at that point in the game, and Brambles is pretty good for tough, dense rounds in the early game, like 22, 23, 25, 27, 31, maybe a few more, I don't know. Especially around 40, where an Alk buffed Brambles basically just solos the entire round for free. It's decent. He's also pretty easy to use. You only really have to make sure that Wall of Trees is always active, and that you are using Brambles sometimes. That's why I say Oban is high B tier for black bordering. Next, we've got Churchill. Low D tier for him. Sorry, he just isn't that good, and he can be somewhat difficult to get the most out of. He costs a ton, and it can be pretty hard to get him early, but you still do have to get him pretty early because he levels really, really slowly. His early game is pretty good once you get him, though. And then you've got his mid game, which is alright, but outclassed. Then you have his late game, which is just not good. He does such little damage without AP shells active to the point where it just isn't worth using him. Even with AP shells active, his damage is okay at best. He only does decent damage as well if you can clump the Bloons, but not too much clumping, because if you clump too much, he will get completely pierce capped and just die. The reason he does better the more clumped things are is how his projectile works, but I really won't get into that right now because it's pretty complicated. So yeah, he's just a damage hero that doesn't do good damage, and you need to be on top of his ability timings because they can be pretty tight and you do have to use a lot of abilities to make him work. Pretty deserving of low D tier in my opinion. Next, we've got Ben. I think this is pretty obvious. E tier. I don't really think I have to explain this much. He's supposed to make you money, except it's chimp so you can't make money, except he actually loses you money because of how Trojan and Siphon work. Ben plus Permaspike is his only good strategy, but it's really difficult to black border with, so you can't really count on it. I'm not going to be counting that at all. He is technically usable, but just never good. Not quite F tier, though. Next, we have Pat. I've decided to put Pat in the middle of C tier. He's mostly a support hero, and works decently with Tax Zone and Sun Avatar. That's basically it, though. He used to be really good with Super Maelstrom, but since that has been nerfed into the ground, it kind of sucks. Most of his value lies in his stuns, which can be made really strong with an overclock, and his level 3 ability is also pretty valuable. His level 3 is why he's good with Tax Zone and Sun Avatar to begin with. That's really it. His strategies are alright, but are pretty ability timing dependent, and he only has like 2 usable strategies that work on certain maps. C tier for him. Could be better. Next, we have Ezili. When not trying to black border, Ezili is very strong, because Hex is just insanely good. However, when trying to black border, she isn't ideal because of how tough her ability timings and micro can be to make the most out of Hex. Using Prince of Darkness alongside her is decent for black borders, but still requires ability timing, so not ideal. She is good, but timing dependent, so yeah, if you're fine with timings, she's pretty good, but yeah, C tier for her as well, but like a more lower C tier just because of how hard she is to use. Now, we've got Adora. Adora is personally going to go in a more middle B tier. She is really good early game, probably the second best early game hero in the game, and she has some of the most late game damage you can find in a hero. Her early game is incredibly good because she has a ton of Pierce, which is incredible in that part of the game, and Long Armor Light is basically just a complete screen wipe. She doesn't do that well mid-game, so that hurts a little, but once she reaches her later levels through constant usage of her sacrifice ability, she just shreds everything. Buffing her up with an overclock, an Alk buff, and a jungle drums will make her basically just wipe the entire screen every time you use an ability, especially if you use multiple at the same time. However, she can be pretty tough to use, and you do have to do a lot of planning on what to sacrifice and when, and you also have to time her abilities a little bit. But once you've planned it just a tiny bit, it's not too much of an issue. She is incredibly strong, but kind of tough to use, so I have to put her in B tier. That's like the highest I can. Next, we've got the noob's favorite, Etienne. I might just be a hater, but I don't think I am. I think Etienne should go in the middle of D tier. He is terrible early game, like one of the worst. He does nothing. He kind of sees camo, and sometimes his drones just get stuck on the other side of the map, fire at a yellow, and miss it. So that's kind of annoying. But yeah, he's decent mid-game with his UCAV, and his late-game damage is just subpar. Oh, but he gives global camo detection for free! Okay, but so does a signal flare, and using Etienne makes you waste a hero slot. Yeah, his damage is just not good, and quite fitting for D tier, and his support does not bring him back. Now, we have the best hero for black bordering thus far in the video, Sada. I'm going to put her in A tier. Sada is great for black bordering. You can start with her, she demolishes the early game, does great mid-game damage with her abilities, and even her main attack starts to get pretty good when she hits level 11, and then she kind of keeps it up late game. She is a pure damage hero with no supporting capabilities whatsoever, and it kinda works. She's also, in my opinion, the easiest hero to use out of all of them. You just plop her down, give her a Dragon's Breath and a Relentless Glue, and she will put in work. Her abilities can be somewhat tough to time, but not too often. Sword Charge is usually just an ability you want to throw away if you're scared at a bunch of ceramics or DDTs, and Leaping Sword is good on just about everything. It can be used to clean up ceramic swarms or like ZOMG damage. It's good for everything. She is just really good for black bordering, fitting all the qualities you want. She's got early game, incredible damage, and she's really easy to use alongside it. That's why I think she's deserving of A tier for black borders. Next, we've got Brickle. I'm going to put her in B tier, but like a higher B tier. Outside of black bordering, she's easily the second best hero in the game because of how overpowered mine stacking is, but that's not really viable for black borders, so I'm not going to be counting that. For black bordering, she's basically just the sub and boat buffing hero in the way that Striker is the bomb and mortar buffing hero. She will accompany your sub and boat-based strategies. That's about it. She does her job really well, though, and for the purposes of black bordering, she's pretty easy to use, only having to worry about her level 3 ability, which is very strong, and the occasional but rare Mega Mine. Solid B tier. Next, we've got Sai. Solid A tier. Sai is really good at black bordering. Their early game is mediocre, but they will eat 3 out of 4 ceramics on round 40, which is like absolutely huge. Mid game, they are one of the best, tearing apart every single tough round with their stuns, screams, and even main attack to some extent. Late game, they keep it up, absolutely murdering tough rounds, except all of the ones that have DDTs. Sai is pretty easy to use still, only having to manage 2 abilities that are pretty easy to time. Like for stun, you just press it when there's a big Bloon swarm, and the Bloon swarm probably won't exist for much longer. And then you press the scream button when there are a lot of BFBs on screen in the late game or a lot of ceramics on screen in the mid game. And, oh, they're all gone now. Huh, that's nice. Okay. Yeah, I don't really know what to say more about Sai. Solid A tier. Now, we move into the most broken black border hero to ever exist. Geraldo. Geraldo is the first and only S tier. Geraldo is essentially the ultimate safety card, being able to add anything to your defense for just a small price tag. You need to prevent RNG and catch leaking ceramics, you've got spikes. You need to murder the entire early game, you've got glue. You need the most broken cleanup to ever exist and early game power, you've got turrets. You need late game damage, you've got Jerry Fires. You need a lot of late game damage, you've got genies. He has literally everything you could ever possibly need, and he is just really easy to use alongside it once you learn generally how he works. But you can learn that pretty easily by just using him. Once you learn how he works and plan the run even a little bit, you've beaten every single Chimps map for free, and he doesn't even have like much mid-round micro at all. Most of the stuff you do with him is between rounds, so that's really nice. I think this is a pretty easy S tier. Next, we have a move that surely won't anger anyone. Corvus, F tier. Straight to F tier. Corvus is like the exact opposite of good for black borders. His entire thing is micro. Like, his entire thing. You have to be on top of spamming nourishment, or else you lose a ton of damage. Then you've just got to spam spells, spam some more spells, and spam deactivate spells sometimes. It's just really hard to use and figure out. Even though he is powerful, the sheer difficulty in learning and using him makes me want to put him in F tier. Sorry, Corvus fans. I'm not even sure if there are any Corvus fans to offend with that one. But yeah, sorry Corvus fans anyway. Finally, we have the newest hero, Rosalia. As of writing this, she kinda sucks, so I'm gonna put her in D tier. Apparently she is bugged to just straight up not get the attack speed bonus based on RBE, which is supposed to be like her whole thing, so she kinda sucks right now. Her early game is pretty good, but immediately does nothing mid-game, then her late game damage starts to pick up again a little bit, but it's at most slightly above average. Then her support. She discounts aces and helis by 5%. Wow, how incredible and groundbreaking. The money you save with the discount could and should just be used to buy a different hero. Yeah. You also have to constantly move her around on multi-lane maps, which is a bit annoying, but not the biggest problem. So yeah, D tier for her. Anyway, that's just about it for the heroes. I will be doing tier 5s, tier 4s, and tier 3s in the next video in this series. That probably won't come out for a while though, because I won't have much time to make it. Anyways, I hope this helped you out in some way. Have a nice rest of your day, and goodbye.